All right, so we'll wrap up our topic about the transportation revolution today. We don't have a whole lot left to cover, so we'll get that done, take your quiz. But before we do that, what questions do you have about your essay due in a week? Okay, let's do what time?
30 minutes before class.
Okay. Ooh.
One of my sources that I'm using is a primary source.
Okay.
But I found it on like Scholastic.
Okay.
Use it as a secondary source.
Is it like part of a anthology or a book of primary sources?
Yeah, it's a Plymouth Plantation. From Bradford. It's Bradford's Journal of.
Oh, Bradford subscription?
Yeah.
Well, now that would just be the primary source. But yeah, so you just find an article of Bradford's plantation, that should be good to go. Yeah. Any other questions? So do 30 minutes before class to the Dropbox on D2L as a Word doc. All right. Google. Folks, when you export it as a Word doc, double check that your footnotes are there before you submit it. All right. Cool. No questions? All right. So we left off on Monday with kind of looking at this question again of how are capitalism, democracy separate from each other? And each of your answers are good, but if you think in the context of an environmental history of the market revolution and the transportation revolution, right? You've got some really good economic, some great political science responses. But what is the way, or how could an environmental historian answer this question about this relationship? What have we learned about capitalism's response to these revolutionary moments? It's all been about exploitation, right? Gaining access to abundant natural resources, which what do we have to do to gain that access? We have to move westward, we have to conquer new land, etc. But we must also use transportation to reach those resources, right? Steamboats, railroads, canals, etc. But to do that, you also need those natural resources, right? So you're giving this kind of double hit on natural resources to exploit it, okay? And so it's an exploitive system of the environment that has what consequence? Well, when we think of the building of infrastructure across this country, whether it's railroad, canal, or road, we are transforming the environment. And the further west we move, what is the result of this transportation revolution to exploit the riches of the West? We significantly alter the landscape, right? Think about railroads. As they built this transcontinental system in the West, what benefit did they gain? They were given massive land grants to build this railroad, right? 10 square miles for every mile of track that they laid. Why is that acceptable? It was the government's way of subsidizing this really expensive endeavor. And what did the railroad do with these millions of acres of land? They sold it for profit. Did they use the land for resource extraction? Did they homestead it? No, right? So they made millions off this effort. How does that affect our democracy? Go ahead.
Like lobbyists.
Right. So railroad tycoons hiring lobbyists at the state level, at the federal level, that help negotiate this crazy public-private partnership. But if you think about the democratic value, going all the way back to Jefferson, westward expansion is about gaining access to land to do what? To exploit and to prosper and to grow this democracy. So in the 1840s, how do we do that? The homestead, right? We give you this 100 and so acres of land in exchange for a decade of your hard work making this land sustainable and prosperous. Environmental impact of the Homestead Act? Absolutely. But with the Railroad Act, those stipulations are pulled away. So was that willingness to give away those millions of acres democratic? No, because it doesn't benefit the people. And so what you're looking at through the lens of an environmental historian is, by this mid-19th century, late 19th century context, rather than working in tandem, capitalism and democracy like it was at the beginning of the market revolution, they've now separated themselves, right? Because our government is acting more on behalf of the interest of who? A corporation. And a corporation that we want to go out and exploit the environment for profit. All right, does that make more sense? So there's even this shift through the market revolution to something new, right? That makes it that revolutionary period. You've moved from subsistence to market to something very new at the end of the 19th century, right? And it comes at the expense of the environment and of the people. Does that make sense now? Okay. Questions? So to wrap up, tell me the characteristics of the colonial economy and the market economy. Okay, well, we in the last ones, what was missing? What was missing as options for you to choose from?
With the economy. Agricultural.
Okay. Sure, transportation's missing, absolutely, right? So the colonial economy, besides being mercantilistic, what type of economy was it? It was barter, yep. It was communal, right? And again, what do I mean when we talk about the economy being communal? Really just focused on the village, maybe the other neighboring village, right? And as such, right, that economy that is communal was dependent upon barter, but it was also subsistence. Okay. So now put your environmental historian hat on. What is the environmental impact of the colonial economy? And itself. Okay. You think about so it's often localized, or maybe even at most what? Regional. Right? Cool. So what did I leave out on the market economy? Transport, yes, absolutely. Turn that into words. Okay, so it's characterized by expansion, yeah. But what type of an economy is it? So it's a capitalist economy, but it's a national, right? But it's even what? Global, right? We do have some global trade, right? Because there is the East Coast ports, but it's really only with England. When the market economy comes about, we begin to trade with all of Europe, right? Which forces this westward expansion, which makes it more of a national economy because we are connected through transport. As such, what goes away? Barter, right? We move towards a national currency. What's the environmental impact? Does it stay localized? So it still says localized. Is it still regional? Yeah. But it becomes national, right? You're taking raw materials, natural resources, or growing things west of the Mississippi, crossing over the Mississippi and taking it to the Northeast, the South, the Mid-Atlantic, right? So you have a localized impact. You may produce and move some of that regionally, but to achieve success in a capitalist economy, you must move that good to the market, right? And again, you can't forget about the impact of that transportation itself, right? And how it alters the landscape to make it possible. Does that make sense? Cool. Anything else we're leaving out? Okay. None of you had anything that kind of crossed both, which surprised me. Were there any options that could cross both the colonial and the market economy? Does subsistence go away? No, right? Do the East Coast, or what did I call it? East or coastal exporting economy, does it go away? No, it gets bigger, right? So those two could still be in the middle, right? They could cross, right? How about the corporation? I didn't include that. Is the corporation in one column or the other? Not really, right? It begins in the colonial economy, right? Because technically every colony started out as a corporation. But as you get to the market economy, it transforms. It revolutionizes the economy, the politics, the culture, and the environment. Okay? It's one of the hard things that students struggle with in history is this type of exercise, right? It's not as clean cut. You can't always put things in specific columns, especially when you take it through the environmental lens, right? Questions? All right. Okay. What factor had the greatest impact on the American environment during this period? Oh my goodness. Need more caffeine. Why was that so hard to answer? They're all factors. But what's the biggest problem in my question? As you finish writing your paper, that word, right? Impact is a word that I cannot stand in history, right? Because technically the definition of impact is what? Right? It's a verb. Okay? The way it gets used in history is very problematic. Right? And especially if you write something like this. Did I tell you what type of impact I'm looking for? No, right? So while it's okay to use this word impact, right? You got to get away from that verb, like something impacting the ground or whatever that is, and be specific about what this impact is. Okay? Courtney's right. I mean, it's kind of everything. And I didn't put everything in there as options, right? Because if you're thinking about the impact on the environment, it's too big to handle, right? Are we talking air, water, landscape? Even more nuanced, soil, flora, fauna, right? So this is that challenge that we have in being environmental historians, is trying to figure out the most effective way to describe the way the environment changes throughout American history, okay? But really interesting. It's like textile, railroads, coal mining, steam power are all kind of lumped together. Nobody went with canal building or water power, which is fascinating. Okay, so be careful in the words that you use in your paper. So now that we've kind of tried to wrap this whole thing up, what is one question you still have about the market revolution, the transportation revolution, etc.? This is a rather complicated topic. Well done. Discovered a feature. Okay, so we'll just kind of answer a few of these. When you think about the time frame of the market revolution, it's roughly what 1790 to about 1860 ish, right? Because as you read and as we described these last 2 weeks, because it's so localized and so regional, it begins obviously in New England, even before this, really. But if we focus it on a system focused on democracy, taxation, tariffs, etc., we look more at that 1790 period because that's when we have the federal government, right? So it's a hard thing to really nail down. The 1860s is a little easier, mainly because in American history, we always like to mark periods by war, right? What follows 1860 is Civil War, right? The economy drastically comes to a halt and changes, right? But again, it's a hard thing to kind of nail down. And so often that's why you see historians going circa, right? Ish. Some of you are kind of looking at this chicken and the egg thing, right? Transportation or the market revolution, which one comes first? That's hard, right? If we think regionally, the market revolution took place first, right? If we think New England. But the more it spreads out from New England, you had to have that transportation to make the revolution take place. So it's very chicken and egg. You don't have either one without the other. And I guess, you know, that those motivations and the factors that led to that shift from the colonial to the market economy, I mean, by and large, it's profit, right? Finding the best way to cut profit or cut costs to increase profit. And the people that are best at that, according to capitalist theory, is a corporation, right? Hence, Lowell Mill. It's a great example. And as a result, that does change American culture and society. Something we didn't talk about, but I talk in other history classes. The market revolution leads to a skyrocketing in the way American families develop in an adverse way. More women who go to work in the mills are less likely to get married. Right? When they do get married, they're older, and as a result, they have a shorter window to have kids, which drastically changes the family. Right? Instead of the 11 kids in New England, maybe down to like 5. Right? Still very big, but it's fewer because you have less time to build that family. We also see divorce rates skyrocket because of the market revolution. So it's lots of fascinating stuff. Cool. All right. So we are possibly on the verge of a new transportation revolution right now. Anybody know what that is? What's the new transportation revolution we're living in right now? Yeah. Moving towards electric vehicles of whatever kind that is, right? What's the problem with moving to an electric vehicle? The battery, right? What's the problem with the battery? In what way? Good.
When it's.
Yes. But what about the beginning life of that battery? Right? Where's the world's largest supply of lithium? Does anybody know? Southern California, Nevada. Right now, the federal government, state and local governments are trying to figure out how to gain access to that significant supply of lithium to go and build these batteries to electrify our economy and our transportation system. Think about where those two big deposits are, Southern California and Nevada. What's the problem? Sure. Populations, also two very different states, very different political systems and different regulations, right? The move to gain permits in Nevada is like blowing through the process. In California, it's not, which is ironic because why? Yeah. But their regulations are so stringent that basically they can't gain access to the lithium, right? And also, there's this big push in two other major transportation industries, airline travel and shipping. How do you fix that? It's crazy as well. Batteries don't work for either one of those. Like distances are too great, too heavy. Right? And so there's a big conversation about what you do there. And so we're in the midst of one right now because you have to drastically change those two industries in particular. Right? Some shipping companies are proposing nuclear. Others are proposing a weird thing with hydrogen. One's proposing something with ammonia. Like the science is insane. And then the airline industry is beginning. Right? And so we're in this difficult situation right now. All right. Let's move on. Go ahead and take your quiz. Get out of here when you're finished. All right. Yes, you are getting out early. I'll make it bigger so you can see it.